Hey, good day, class. It is 11:25 here on Friday, the 30th of August. It's a lovely day. First cool day here in lovely Aiken County, South Carolina. And today we're going to be reviewing the information from Chapter 2 of our textbook, Communication and Perception. Okay, hold on a second. Let me get my beverage, which today is black coffee. And we'll get started. So a lot of people ask right off the bat, why do we even talk about perception when it comes to communication? Well, there is a school of philosophy called, let me make sure I get this spelled right, phenomenology. And technically, phenomenology studies structures of conscious experiences. What a phenomenologist would tell you is that there is no reality. It's just our shared perceptions of what we consider to be reality. Excuse me, and the physical reality absolutely makes no difference to us. The phenomenologist studies how humans perceive what we all call reality and how we structure those thoughts and how those structures will influence culture, society, individuals, groups, families, things like that. So people have been very interested in perception as it affects our communication for an extremely long period of time. So first of all, when we start talking about perception, let's talk about how we make a perception, okay, in the process. Now, perception in the book is defined as the selecting, organizing, and interpreting our experiences, okay? The book says information, but I don't want to limit it to information because we also build, as we start talking about, further on down, the schema and schemata that we build in order to perceive our world and to understand our world. We don't just do that based on information. We do that based on our experiences. Now, gathering information is an experience. I won't deny that. But we're going to talk about experiences, not about information that we gather. Okay? First of all, we have to understand that we have perceptual filters. Okay? An experience has to get through a perceptual filter in order to be experienced. Okay? Or a stimuli has to get through those filters in order to be put into our existing structures. I mean, we're bombarded with stimuli every single day, 24/7 while we're awake, okay? Even while we're asleep, our subconscious is processing all those experiences we had and filing them away in our long-term memory. So we're dealing with stimuli all the time, okay? So number one, we have to get, for an experience to be perceived, it has to make it through a filter. Second of all, interpretation comes from past experience. Okay? So all of our perception is organized, how we perceive it, interpretation of new experiences is based on our old experiences. We are the sum product of all that we have done before. Okay? So let's take that as a baseline. So let's talk about the 3 steps of perception. Again, this goes back to what we were saying just a second ago. Selection. All right? We all the time are faced with stimuli. We choose to listen to or be exposed to or to perceive a small subset of all the available data. You've all seen those things where you walk into a room, you're allowed to look around the room, then you walk back out, and then you have to answer a series of questions on what was in the room. Okay? Person stands in front of you for a couple of seconds. You get to glance at them, and then they go out and they ask you questions like, what color was the person's hair? What color were their eyes? What did the button on the lapel of her jacket say? Okay, we've all seen that. We have to select what stimuli we choose to listen to and what we choose to interpret, and thus to put in our schema. For parents that are listening to this, you've all had experiences where you've been in a crowded room, and on the far side of that crowded room, your child among a group of other children cries. And you're on that in a heartbeat because you immediately select that for further processing. Okay? So step one is selection. Okay? Something you need to know about selection is visual and oral, not oral, oral stimuli has a better chance of being selected. Visual is something that we see, okay? Oral is something that we hear, all right? Those are going to do more, be more likely to be selected than something we would need to touch or smell or something like that, okay? Our expectations will have a positive will be both positive and negative in how we select things, okay? We select stimuli that will reinforce our pre-existing expectations of an event, okay? We don't, again, we have to filter somehow. So when we select something, we're probably going to select, process, and put into our schema something that reinforces our current interpretations, okay? We may select something that is counter to our current expectations based on the premise that it's so jarring, so unexpected. Okay, and we've all seen the videos, and these are personal for me. You know, you see, the last one I saw the other day was this particular, a rather large man, probably weighs in the 380 to 420 range, walks out on a dance floor, and then start busting moves like nobody can believe. Okay, that's a very jarring experience for us because our expectation is that a big guy can't move like that. So we'll suddenly perceive that and select that for perception. All right? What gets lost, so we have these things that support our current expectations. We have those things that are jarring because they don't support our current expectations. In the middle, things that neither confirm nor deny, they're not going to get selected for perception all that much. So you need to be aware of that. So after we have selection, we have organization. Okay? It is important for us to begin to put the experiences together, to group them into structures, okay, so that we can place them and deal with it. Okay? A lot of times, and almost all times, our own personal prior experiences, prejudices, organizations will cause us to organize things in a way that may or may not be correct. Okay? We will see a father, two men and a small child, and one of the men is holding the small child, and we will look at that and we'll see, oh, that's a single father with his child and another man. We won't necessarily think right off the bat, oh, that's the same gender couple and their child. Okay? We assume that the number of people standing in close proximity to their same ethnicity are all in a group. And the person that is of a different ethnicity that is standing in close proximity is not a member of that group. These are things that we all apply all the time. It's not good. It's not bad. Okay? We also put things together that aren't at all related and sort of smash them together in order to fit into a current structure or organization or schema that we have already in our heads. The biggest thing about that is like conspiracy theories. We'll take two unrelated events and then try to put them together based on our need to have organization and not have things just happening randomly. Okay? So the last part is once we select, once we organize, we interpret. All right, in interpretation, we put experiences into our existing schemata. Now, schemata is the plural form of schema. And if it sounds like a scheme, like some sort of, you've got a scheme to do something. Yeah, it's the same root. A schemata is just a structure or organization. It's sort of a mental database that we all have. So it's when we perceive something, we select something for perception, we begin to organize it, and then we interpret it in relation to all the other information that's in that schema. Okay? There's nothing wrong with having schema. If you didn't have schema, you wouldn't be able to organize your thoughts, and you would just be all over the place all the time. Okay? But be aware that you pushing experience into a single schema may not be appropriate. It may actually lead you to some wrong conclusions. Remember the first one we talked about, and this happens to people all the time, where you've got 3 people of one ethnicity and 1 person of another ethnicity waiting to be seated at a restaurant, and the hostess will go, party of 3? Well, no, it's a party of 4. You interpreted that based on people's ethnicity, okay? But that's naturally who we are. That's not an evil person. You wouldn't say that host or hostess was racist just based on that. It's just something we all naturally do. We all have schema, and we'll talk about how that can impact us, okay? All right, so we've talked about how we build perceptions, okay? So let's talk about how we use those perceptions in of others. How do we build perceptions of others? All right? So we all judge other people. It's human. Anybody who looks at me and says, well, I never judge another person, that's just not the kind of person I am, they're lying to you, okay? Maybe not intentionally lying to you, but they're certainly not aware. We can't be friends with 7.6 billion people, okay? We have to choose a small subset of the people that we know to be our friends. I'm friends with everybody I know. No, you're not, because you only socialize with a small subset. You're given a choice between talking to person A and person B. You talk to person B and not person A. Why did you do that? Well, I did that based on my judgment. So you do judge people. Okay? Everybody judges other people all the time. That's a very human thing. We judge people and decide who we're going to socialize with. We judge organizations and decide who we're going to work for. We judge our romantic interest and decide whether or not we want to marry them. Okay? We decide, we use our judgment to decide who we're going to trust. Okay? I mean, if you think you don't judge people, think about the one single biggest secret you have in your life, and then run down the list of people that you would tell. Right? There's probably hopefully there's 1 or 2 people that you trust enough that you can reveal such things. Okay? But there's not everybody. Or you may have used your judgment to tell nobody. But we use our judgment to you may just decide everybody's awful and I'm not telling anybody. And that's a perfectly valid judgment. Okay, the point I'm trying to make is judgment isn't necessarily bad. We all do it all the time. Okay? We make our judgments of other people based on 2 things. First thing is attribution. Attribution. Okay? Attribution says we don't see people's actions as random. We see them as being motivated, and we find explanations for other people's actions. We don't believe that people just, somebody walks up to you and says, wow, those shoes, and then they just walk off. We assume that's not random. They had a motivation for doing that. There's 2 possible motivations. One is we have internal attribution. Okay? And that says something is based on their personality. Okay? It's who they are. That person walked up to me and said, those shoes, because they're a jerk. And they wanted me to feel bad about my shoes. Okay? The second thing is, it could be external attribution. Now, external attribution is something where we attribute the actions to the situation, to the external environment, not directly to the person's personality. Okay? Here's the problem, though. We tend to default to either internal or external. What do you think it is? Take a second to think. Yeah. We tend to default to giving internal attributions to people's actions. Okay? I mean, and everybody's seen this if you haven't actually done it yourself. Okay? The cop was a jerk. I mean, to give me a ticket, that cop is a jerk. Well, you were going 65 in a 25-mile-an-hour school zone. He was just doing his job. No, he wasn't. He's a jerk. Okay? Yeah, you know, my personal one that I hear all the time. Yeah, I guess the professor's just having a bad day. He gave me a 38 on this speech out of 100. It's clearly he's not in a mood to listen to a good speech. Okay, you kind of like only went 2.5 minutes on a 4 to 6 minute speech. You didn't have an introduction. You just sort of launched into this random association, stream of consciousness kind of organization that didn't make any sense to anybody. We never got a clear sense of what you were talking about. You looked at the floor more. Yeah, there's this whole page and a half of things you did wrong. But I'm having a bad day. So it's me internalizing, not the external motivation that it could have been, you. Okay? And this happens all the time. I mean, we always want to, when your spouse, partner, significant other comes in, and we have a tendency, we're going like, hey, how was your day? Why are you asking me a question like that? Okay. Hopefully we'll sit there and we'll think, well, there's something externally going on here, and attribute it to an outside force. Maybe they had a horrible day at work. Maybe traffic sucked. Maybe they got a toothache. Okay? But what we generally try to do is, when you go, hey, how was your day? Why are you talking to me like that? Our reaction is to say, wow, my partner is being a jerk. I'm talking to you like that. And we wind up, that's how we get in fights. Okay? So we default, when we give attribution, we default to the internal and not the external. We generally have a tendency to say, people are acting that way because that's who they are. Not that's because of the circumstances they are currently dealing with. All right? So let's talk about a couple of things that have to do with internal and external attribution. Let's talk about a couple of how we attribute things to people. All right? First of all, there is the trying to figure out where I am in my notes. Hold on one second. Okay. Once we attribute, there's a couple of things you need to be aware of. Okay? And again, I'm not telling you these things are right or wrong. I'm just telling you there's things you need to be cognizant of. There is, when you're perceiving others, there's what we call the primary effect. And this primary has to do with the first, deals with your first perceptions. Okay? There is no second chance to make a first impression. So if you evaluate people based on, or attribute things to people based on their primary effect, okay, then guess what? They're going to, and you interpret, and this is methods of interpretation. Okay? You may never get past your first impression of it. Okay? Another one is recency. The recency effect. Well, yeah, I know that guy's been a bit of a jerk to me his entire life, but yesterday he was very nice to me. So I think he's a nice guy. Okay? Whatever happened last is what you think about an individual. Okay? Other factors that can affect our interpretations. Okay? In our culture, in a lot of cultures, You know, does everybody know who Mike Rowe is? The guy who used to do dirty jobs. He's done a whole bunch of things. One of his big things now is you know, trying to advance the cause that we have a $3 million person shortage of tradesmen, people who work trades like you're studying here at Aiken Technical College. And he pushes really hard because he says in our culture, the presumption is that people are going to go to a four-year college. And if you don't go to a four-year college and get a college degree, you're somehow not measuring up to your potential. And he is fighting against our cultural perception that somebody who decides to go to trade school, decides to become a welder, a plumber, a carpenter, a cabinet maker, that those people are somehow lesser than the people who go to a four-year college and get a bachelor's degree of some sort. You know, he'll point out that, you know, when you graduate from a trade school, you have way less debt. When you graduate from a trade school, you're going to be making a lot more money than you will if you make in those first years. And that over the long term, okay, if you continue to advance in your trade craft, you'll wind up making just as much money as somebody who went and got a bachelor's degree. The bachelor's degree has no financial impact in the long term, which is all true. But our culture tells us when we see somebody, you know, when we all get together at a high school reunion and everybody's standing around and going like, oh, what do you do? Well, I now work in a bank. What do you do? Well, I'm now, you know, working for an accounting firm. What do you do? I'm a welder. People go, whom? Even though statistically we know through the figures that that's just as good a career as anything else. Okay? But our culture says different, and that will affect our perceptions. Okay? There is also personality. Okay? A person's general way of thinking, it's our outlook on the world, so to speak. And if you're a person that has a very, extroverted personality, where you're really engaging with everybody, you will interpret other extroverts in a very more positively than you will an introvert. Okay? I mean, an extrovert is a person who likes to express themselves and validate their thoughts through verbalizing them. So if you're in a relationship with an introvert, like I am, my wife is a classic introvert, you'll sometimes get very frustrated with another person when you go on this great 5-minute discourse on an idea you had, and that introvert's reaction to you is, mm-hmm. And that's it. I used to drive me up the wall with my wife, who was from Vermont, very introverted. I'd tell her the most funny joke I'd ever heard in the world, and her reaction would be, and I would go, "What? Why didn't you laugh?" She'd go, "I laughed." Okay? If two extroverts get together and they're talking and they're going back and forth, their personalities are complementing each other. Same for introverts. If you're an introvert, I know there are times when my wife has just looked at me and said, could you give me a minute here? You're a little overwhelming. Okay? And so if you're just building your relationship with another person, okay, and you are on the opposite extremes, you're an extrovert and that introvert is not giving you the feedback you need, or if you're an introvert and that extrovert is just overwhelming you, those kind of things can have a negative impact on your perception of another individual. Okay? Again, none of that is right, none of that is wrong. That is all just how we perceive each other. Okay? All right, so let's talk about and close here with how we perceive ourselves. So the last perception we're going to talk about is our self-perception. Okay? Self-perception answers the basic question, who am I? All right? Not only do we use our schemas to organize our perception of the people, other people, We use those same schemas to organize how we see ourselves. All right? Sometimes we have, in the book discusses two of the more common theories, what we call the looking glass theory, where we would like to think that our who we associate with and the people that we're around reflect who we are. Okay? If you like to party and you see people around you that are partying all the time, and you think that that's who you are positively reflected in the people around you. If you're studious and you like to read books, you like to have people around you that reflect that back on yourself. Okay? The other theory is, so there's the looking glass theory, which is self-reflection. But there's also the next, social comparison. Social comparison. And what social comparison does is it basically says, I'm better than that guy. I'm not as good as that guy. Okay? That person, I'm smarter than them. That person, I'm stronger than they are. That person, and if I consider myself, if a core part of my self-image of who I am is that I consider myself to be very physically strong, and I see a guy over there and going like, I'm stronger than that guy, and then he outperforms me, I have, that could try to force me to change who I think I am. Okay? Now, all of this is going to affect our self-esteem. Okay? Not only is judging others universal. Okay? You can't say, well, I just don't judge people. You do. Everybody does. It's part of the human condition. We also judge ourselves, and we evaluate ourselves in answering not only who I am, but what kind of a person. People can be very critical of themselves and have what we call low self-esteem. People can be very up on themselves. They can have very high self-esteem. People can be all over the place when they come to those certain schema and they rate themselves. Like I will tell you, when it comes to communicating, verbally communicating in a public communication environment, I have very high self-esteem. When it comes to ordering the half rack of ribs instead of the full rack of ribs at a barbecue joint, I have very low self-esteem because I know I don't need the full rack of ribs, but I am getting the full rack of ribs. I don't have the willpower to do that. So in one area of my life, I have very high self-esteem, and in other areas, I won't say it's low self-esteem, but it's lower. Okay? So we can have variations throughout. The other thing that we do is self-efficacy. Okay? And that's where we ask ourselves, can I do something? Can I do it? Not like, Nike, just do it, but can I do it? Okay? And a lot of that is going to be based on your self-perceptions. Okay? If I go into a barbecue joint, if I go into Central Barbecue in Memphis, Tennessee, okay, and I walk in there, I know if I ask myself, can I order the half rack of ribs this time? The answer is going to be no. I cannot do that. I will order the full rack of ribs. Okay, now if I was asking myself, can I eat a full rack of ribs? Answer is yes. Answer is always going to be yes. Okay? So self-efficacy is, can I do something? Now, a lot of times, and again, racks of ribs are wonderful, but they're not very important. Okay, the question is, can I complete this degree? Can I successfully complete this class? Can I break up with this person, or can I end this relationship with a person when the relationship has become destructive and harmful to me? Okay? These are very significant questions. And your self-perception is going to drive it. Now, all those schemes and all that, what you've selected to put in that schema of yourself is going to be impacted by all of it, is going to answer that question for you. Okay? And sometimes we need to reevaluate. All right, so let's talk about our perception. If we have to reevaluate perceptions, not only of others, but also of ourselves, let's talk about how we change our perceptions. Okay, so, and we're only going to talk about improving perceptions. So let's talk about some obstacles, the things that will keep you from improving your perceptions. First of all, selective exposure. People will not experience or gain experiences that they feel are going to contradict or going to overturn the schema they already have. Okay? First time I really experienced this, I was over at back when I was in graduate school, Ronald Reagan was president. The news came on and the first story was about a speech the president had just given. My professor's wife got up and went over and turned off the television set. And I was just kind of curious. I said, well, can I ask you why you did that? She goes, that guy's got nothing to say I want to hear. I've already made my mind up about him. Well, don't you think you should listen to him to find out what he has to say? That might change your mind. Nope, don't care. Already made my mind up about the guy. Okay? In the 2016 presidential campaign, I told people when Hillary Clinton got the nomination, I said the Democratic Party could just stop spending money on advertising because nobody is going to change their mind on Hillary Clinton. Because I see too many people, when you would talk to them about Hillary Clinton, they were going, I don't want to hear it. I've made my mind up. On both sides. Okay? Well, she's a corrupt politician. No, she's not. I'm voting for her. Well, she's, better than the other guy. Well, I don't care. Okay? So people will not expose themselves. Okay? Now, you can look at the shirt. I'm a two-time graduate of Auburn University. I have had alumni of the University of Alabama tell me a million times that if you went to the Auburn-Alabama game in Tuscaloosa, you would find that the vast majority of Alabama fans are wonderful people. I am never going to find out because I have had enough bad experiences with Alabama fans. I don't need to experience that. I freely and openly admit that. I've told Alabama alumni that. And they've kind of, see what you're saying. Okay? I will not expose myself to that. Okay? Then there is selective recall. And that is just we don't like to remember things that we don't agree with. Everybody's had an experience where you've been involved in a common experience with an individual, and after the fact, you have a conversation about the events, and you remember things radically different. Had an experience a couple of weeks ago. A group of contractors over at Fort Gordon that I used to work with. We still get together. We're kind of a mutual support group. We have a lot of common experience through our careers. I mean, some of us are still dealing with some of the issues that are residual from that. So we get together, once a month or so and have lunch together. Well, we were all teaching a class up at Fort Bragg, and we were all present, or three of the four of us were present. And person one started telling a story about a confrontation he had with one of our students. Verbal, it wasn't a fist fight, but there was this confrontation where, by his description, he was very cool, very calm, very collected. and handled it very, very adroitly, handled it with a rapier wit and a quick word, and everything settled down. Well, person one had to leave early. Person two, who had been in that classroom with me, looked at me and said, "Is that the way you remember that happening?" And I went, "No." Well, person four over here, who was not there, went, "Well, what are you guys talking about?" And we told him, "Well, you remember when he was talking about that confrontation and he was so quick and so calm and so cool to deal with it?" No, that's not what happened. He started screaming at the guy right off the bat. Now, I don't attribute that, remember, internal and external attribution. I don't make that an internal attribution. I know that the guy was going through had a lot of issues going on. There was a lot of exterior strife that was going on within the company he worked for with his boss. He ultimately got terminated from his job about 3 weeks later. Okay, I knew that all of that was, and I don't criticize him necessarily for escalating the confrontation. But what the two of us agreed on was his recollection of de-escalating was not correct. Now, is he lying? No, I don't think so. I think he honestly remembers that he de-escalated or at least maintained the same level of confrontation. And in his mind, that's what happened. Okay? Human recollection is always kind of fishy. That's why a police officer will always tell you, "I don't trust eyewitness reports." Okay? Because our recall can always be very selective. Okay? So there's selective exposure, selective recall, selective commitment. Oh no, wait a minute. Selective perception. This sort of goes hand in hand, one step before selective recall. Okay? I was, at least 28 years ago, because that's how long I've been married, I was dating a young lady who was from Mountain Brook, Alabama. And if you know anything about Mountain Brook, it's just south of Birmingham. It was the rich enclave for years. Well, it still is. Just south of Birmingham. It was at one time the richest zip code in the United States. Because all the people who had made the big money in Birmingham moved outside the city. And she had gone to Mountain Brook High School. She'd gone to Mountain Brook Elementary School, Mountain Brook Middle School. She had lived her entire life in this incredibly rich enclave. And so we drove over to Montgomery. Montgomery, Alabama, in the 1980s, not one of the richest cities in the nation. In fact, horribly poor at the time. Had not dealt with some economic upheaval in the 1970s very well. It was a very poor city, and as we were driving through the city, I was noticing burned out buildings, lots of young men standing around that were clearly unemployed, young women that were standing around that were unemployed, so you had a high youth unemployment rate. There was all sorts of things that were impacting there that clearly indicated to me that whole strip malls that were in decay, houses that were clearly unoccupied. It was the kind of things you're used to seeing, that usually fall into the category of urban decay. So as we were driving back to Auburn, I remember saying, "Wow, that's really horrible what's happening to Montgomery." And she went, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, clearly things are falling apart there. This is a really tough time for that city." She was going like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's going like, "Well, you saw the burned out houses, you saw the empty stores." I didn't really notice any of that. Okay? I'm not saying she's a bad person. I'm not saying that she didn't see the situations associated with any other persons. Okay? But what I will tell you is she was just, in her experiences, her schema, okay, did not allow her, or she did not put any effort into, perceiving things that ran counter to her idea that everybody had all the money in the world. And ultimately, that's why we stopped dating, was because I was a poor graduate student working with my GI Bill, and that was all the money I had in the world. I was not going to ask my parents for more money. And she was getting a massive influx of money every week from her parents. Okay, and she just could not understand why I couldn't take her and spend money on her like she spent money on herself. Okay, and again, that's just my personal experiences there. And how did that fit into my schema? Rich kid, don't like rich kids. Grew up in a lower middle class family. Okay, first generation to go to college. So that really kind of fit into, in my perception. Now, was she a humanitarian? I don't know. It's been 30 years ago, and I don't recall. What I recall selectively is that she was a typical rich kid. And any rich kids in the class, I apologize. Okay? I'm not saying that all rich kids are bad. Okay? All right, after that, we have what we call a degree of commitment. Degree of commitment. Okay? Think about the fact if you're saying to yourself, well, yeah, I get it, but I am really, I understand that what I'm thinking in my experiences may not be truly accurate and go across the board, and but I'm really into whatever this thing. Okay? I and again, this is a controversial subject, using only as an example. Yeah, I'm totally down with the Second Amendment. I believe everybody should have a right to own a gun. I see that a lot of people, these mass shootings are going to be a problem, but I am very, very committed to the Second Amendment, and that's a core part of my personality. Okay? I know this person is abusive. I know I should get out of this relationship, but man, I'm really into this person, and I just cannot get out of it. Okay? Hand in hand with degree of commitment is public statements. Have you ever found yourself caught in a situation where you really know that you're wrong, and you really know that you've probably been wrong for a while, but because you've been arguing the same point with the same person for so long, you do not think you have the ability to look at them and say, I know we've been fighting about this for the last 2 years, but yeah, I think you're right. Okay? Not only is that a degree of commitment, that's a public commitment as well. And once we've made those public statements, it becomes very hard for us to begin to change our perceptions. Because even if you don't consciously think of it, somewhere in the back of your mind, you're going like, damn it, I've said this so many times in public, and now I'm going to have to turn around and say, I changed my mind. Okay? Best person in the world to remind you that you said something different is a spouse or a child. Okay? My wife is very open about saying, yeah, that's not what you said 6 weeks ago. In which case I go, I do assimilate more experiences. I do have the ability to, change the schema. And yes, I use phrases like, accumulate experiences and schema in my daily life. Thus is the virtues of being a communications instructor. But I look at her and I say, listen, I'm re-evaluating all the schema that I organize things with, and I changed my mind. Okay? Politically, it becomes, after you've been saying for your entire life, I'm a Democrat, and then suddenly you come back and say, I'm a Republican, people are going to look at you and go, I beg your pardon? And then you're going to have to defend that even harder. And again, we internalize that all the time. Well, why are you a Methodist? Well, because I've always been a Methodist. Well, okay. You have all these gripes with the Methodist Church. Why do you keep going back? Well, I've always been a Methodist. My parents were Methodists. Okay? Well, why do you continue to work for that company? You hate your boss. You hate your coworkers. I've been working for this company for 10 years. Yeah, but you can change companies that you're working for. I've said and defended this company many times. But that doesn't mean you don't hate it now. Okay? So, and again, that applies, all of these not only apply internally to how we perceive ourselves, but how we evaluate And this is all happening again with the other guy or the other person that's involved in your relationship. Okay? So here's some advice on improving your perceptions. Okay, number one. Don't have rigid schemas. All right? Things change. Life changes. Okay? Winston Churchill once said that those who are not liberals when they are young have no hearts, and those who are not conservatives when they are old have no heads. Okay? We naturally should be constantly reevaluating, and a lot of times the opposite is true as well. Just, I'm not saying as you get older you should become more conservative. Hasn't happened with me. Okay? But be willing to challenge your own thoughts. Be willing to sit there every once in a while and go, stop. Let's reevaluate this. Tear the schema down and start looking at the experiences that you've had with a flexible schema that allows you to be more open for things. Okay? Now, the book says be critical of social forces. All right? I say be aware, because critical means, I understand what the book meant, that they want you to just be aware. They meant aware, but critical means in most cases to tear something down. Social forces are not always bad. All right? A social force says we shouldn't murder people. There's also a legal force behind that, but culturally, we don't approve of murder. Okay? So don't be critical. Just be aware of the fact that if you want to kill somebody, the social forces are going to tell you that's not a good idea. Okay? But don't be critical of it. Be aware of it. All right? A lot of times we meet people, and based on social forces, the group of people we engage with, our perception of that individual isn't based on our personal experiences, but what a bunch of other individuals that we interact with experiences have pushed upon us. And we should be aware of that. Okay? Be aware of self-fulfilling prophecies. Okay, especially in dealing with yourself. Okay, when I go into Central Barbecue in Memphis, Tennessee, I'm going to get those ribs. Might as well just go ahead and order the whole rack. Okay? That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I tell myself in advance, and this goes hand in hand with self-efficacy, I tell myself in advance that I'm going to do it anyway, so I might as well just embrace it. Okay? Even if it's bad. All right? And that also goes with other people. Oh, I knew my mother-in-law was going to be a jerk when she came down here. Now look at what she's doing. She's playing with my children and paying attention to her grandchildren. What a jerk. Okay? That's not being a jerk. That's being a grandmother. Okay? But my self-fulfilling prophecy means anything she does, I'm going to cram into a schema that says my mother-in-law is a jerk. Okay? Be empathetic. Listen to people. Okay? Focus on them for a second. So I had a long time when I would just casually blow by people that were some people would refer to as panhandling, asking for money. Okay? But then in the IKEA parking lot in Tampa, Florida, a gentleman came up to me and said, hey, listen, I'm a veteran. I was over here at the Tampa VA hospital. My car won't work. I've got to get home. I've got a church meeting tonight. I'm going to take the bus. Can you give me $5 to help me get the bus? And I looked at him for a second. And just, I got no idea if the guy was telling the truth or not. There's a lot of things that would lead me to believe that he was. Okay, the VA hospital was, relatively close. Okay, At least one of the clinics that I knew of was. He was wearing some things that would indicate to me he was a veteran. He said, I'm not asking you, I got a specific thing I got to go. I'm not just asking for some money. And so I began to realize that, I began to think for a second. And I said, you know what? I got a $5 bill in my pocket that I can give him. And I gave him the $5. And a couple of things happened. He was very appreciative, shook my hand. Thanked my wife, who was standing there with me, who gets very nervous around people that are panhandling. And what I began to realize was that I probably got more out of that $5, which I didn't really need. I can do without it. $5 is not a big impact on me. Okay? But I got more out of that exchange, I think, than he did. I mean, he got a bus ride. I mean, I assume he got a bus ride home. I, on the other hand, began to reevaluate. And so since then, I'm not stupid. If I get accosted by a guy, and I'm not in his mannerisms and everything based on my experiences and the schema I have for meeting people on the street, there are times when I'm not comfortable and I'll just keep on going. But I try really, really hard now to be empathetic to people who come up and talk to me and may need some help. Okay? And there are people that are listening to this tape right now that are going like, hey, that's fine. Okay? But if you're going to change the way you perceive the world and others and yourself, you're going to have to start being more empathetic. And the first person that nobody is ever empathetic with is themselves. Okay? We can be harder on ourselves and less empathetic toward ourselves than we are anybody else in the world. Okay? And then finally, do some self-reflection. Do some self-reflection. Take a minute. Evaluate your schema. Look at what experiences you are choosing to interpret. Okay? How you're organizing that. All right? And where the schema are and how, whether or not you're fairly evaluating all the stimuli and all the experiences that you're coming in contact with. Okay? Because that is going to pretty much those schema, again, what we're driving at here is those schema, those attitudes, the way you organize that information, that's going to determine how you engage with people. Okay? So take some time. Again, don't be flexible with your schema. Be willing to change. Be aware of social forces that may be impacting how you organize your experiences. Be aware of self-fulfilling prophecies, not just for you, but for others. Be empathetic and engage in self-reflection every once in a while. Okay? All right, so that's chapter 2. I will be grading your chapter 1 inputs in the next few minutes while this is uploading. You have until next Thursday at 12 noon to get back with to get your inputs in on the discussion boards, not Facebook, on the discussion boards on Blackboard. Okay. Other than that, it's a long weekend. It's Labor Day. Everybody have a good weekend. Stay safe, and we will see you on video, on tape, on YouTube next week.